Welcome back to another episode of the Nursing Now podcast. My name is Janelle McSwiggan, and I am overjoyed to have Erin Ellsworth on my podcast. She's a legal nurse consultant, and we'll be using the acronym LNC, and that's what that stands for, just in case you guys get a little bit confused with that. Erin, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So can you tell my listeners a little bit more about who you are, Ford Consulting, and a little bit about LNC and what that entails? We'll go deeper into it later on, but
Okay. I've been a nurse for 21 years this month, actually, and an
ooh,
LNC for a little over 8 years. Um, and my business name is Ford Consulting. So whenever you work as a legal nurse consultant, most of the time it's your own business and you develop an LLC. So Ford Consulting is that, and it's named after my first son. His name is Ford. So yeah, that's about how it all is.
I love that. And you've been an LNC for about 8 years now, is that right?
Yeah.
That's quite a bit of time. I'm running into a lot of LNCs that are just breaking into it in the last year, last couple of months. So I'm definitely seeing a rise in LNCs, but I was really excited when I figured out how long you've been doing this for. And recently you pivoted to helping nurses become LNCs. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Talk a little bit more about that.
So I like to share on social media, but I started sharing as a new mom account, just thinking, like I learned a lot in my beginning days of being a new mom and started sharing like that. And then once I was doing legal nurse consulting full time, I started sharing bits of that. And I started getting tons of DMs, just people messaging me, hey, what is that? Where do I get started? What do I have to do? And I really wanted to develop some sort of, I don't know, guide to help them because I was literally sending an email. At first, I would just like free form it and say, here's how it goes. And then I developed an email that had links. And then I was like, I just feel like I want to give them more. More and more people just kept coming. And so it took me about a year to kind of figure out, okay, I really need to learn some more skills on how to do this and how to set it up. And I started with just a simple PDF guide. It was August of 23. I launched that. And I just kind of did that on the side of my legal nurse consulting until the end of the year last year. And then in January, I was just seeing that more nurses wanted more from me. They wanted more mentorship, they wanted more products, they just wanted more information. But I really wanted to go all in on that and give them what they wanted. And so I left my firm position and just started my mentorship program. And so that is where I'm at right now.
Wow. Wow. I just want to point out to my listeners, we talk a lot about doing market research and kind of figuring out what the market is saying to you and kind of meeting that demand with the product. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did right there. The market was really screaming to you that there were a lot of nurses looking for alternative careers and that you had a ton of experience in this alternative career and you kind of scaled up from there. So yeah, exactly what we always talk about here. Super interesting. And your mentorship seems pretty comprehensive. Actually, you were recommended to me from someone I think that took your mentorship. I think that's how I asked for you to be on this podcast.
Yeah.
So yeah, you come highly recommended.
Thank you for that. I really pride in taking care of my nurses. They have lots of questions. And that was the biggest thing whenever I started. I had nobody to ask questions. It was literally trial and error. Does this work? Does that not work? How do I go about this? Googling a lot of information.
Mm,
So one of the parts of my mentorship is that you get to ask me questions whenever, via voicemail, like voice message on social media, or you can send me an email. We also have a community group that you can ask questions in. So I really wanted to bring that forth to nurses because I feel like that is how they get helped and they can be successful in this career is being able to ask questions whenever they're getting started. There's just not a lot of information out there to Google and really figure it out. And that was kind of what the premise was behind my product, was to give you the realistic way to get started. I also, whenever I got started, I paid like $10,000 for a course because I was Googling and the same thing came to the top every single time. And then after I was doing it for 2 years, one of the nurses I was working with was like, hey, you didn't have to get that. You didn't need that certificate. And I was like, what? And so she like really enlightened me to that. And so that was another thing that I really wanted to get that out there. A lot of people think that you have to pay thousands of dollars to get started, and it's just not necessary. You do not have to do that. So that is really where my social media point started and me really pushing this guide.
Yes, you are absolutely preaching to the choir for spending thousands. There's a pretty well-known writing course that costs thousands. And it's the first one that pops up on Google because of SEO. So everyone is driven towards it. And it's tough. So I do like keeping my rates well lower than that, because I think a career shouldn't be hindered by someone's affordability to pay for a course when you don't even really need it. And a course can't teach you everything about everything anyways. So there's always going to be learning factors beyond that. So that's interesting that you picked up on that too, because some people do like to capitalize on like SEO and popping up in the search engine and charging a lot of money. And it's really tough.
Yeah.
So it's really tough. I definitely recommend everyone to do their research out there and don't just pop up on the first page of Google. Really
Yes.
explore your options and find something that is really supportive. I do the same thing actually with the people in my medical writing community. I always say, ask me questions, please ask me questions. Email our LinkedIn community, like whatever they need. And it also helps me understand where their thought process is and what resources I might be missing in my course and how I can buffer it up from there. I'm always trying to improve that thing. And the questions have really sparked new like workshops from that. So also doing your market research right there and benefiting the nurse too.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about your journey as a nurse that transitioned to an LNC? What made you want to do this role?
I think that it was more like family driven. So when I say that, I'm originally from Mississippi. I worked for about 9 months before I started travel nursing, and I travel nursed for about 8 years and then landed in Phoenix. I was actually traveling back and forth between Phoenix and San Francisco, and I was working PRN jobs in San Francisco because honestly, that's where the money is, bedside
Yep.
nursing wise.
Yep.
And it was super easy to go back and forth. And then I met my husband in Phoenix and kind of got stuck here, and he asked me to stop doing that. So as we were planning to get married and have children, because I got married pretty late in the game, I was 35, so we knew we would go directly into that. I was working in a very busy pediatric interventional radiology department, and it was literally like I left here in the morning and I had no idea what time I would come home. It really
Oh.
depended on how the day went and what cases were needed.
Mhm.
And so that's when I started searching remote nursing
Yep.
from home. Like, what can you do? Because I was a pediatric nurse. There's only one pediatric hospital here in the Valley. There are other hospitals that have parts of pediatrics, but the main pediatric hospital is the only one. And it's about a 45-minute drive, an hour with traffic.
Mm.
So I knew I wanted to try to decrease that somehow. So in searching remote nursing jobs, legal nursing came up. And like I said, this one program just kept coming to the top, coming to the top. They even had a process where they came to like the larger cities, and it was like a breakfast, not a conference, but just like a meeting where they gave you information and handouts and a book on legal nurse consulting. And they had a program and they were really trying to get you to sign up for the program. And so it took about a year to convince my husband that I really want to do this. This is it. Like, I need to do this. And so I signed up. It was $10,000. I took out a loan from Sally Mae to pay for it. And it was actually an in-person class at that time. So I went to Vegas for a week at 22 weeks pregnant and got my legal nursing certificate and just kind of dug in afterwards. But when I got home, I realized that I had all this information, I mean, in large books, but I didn't have the realistic view of how to get started. Like, okay, now I have the education of what it is and what I'm supposed to be doing and what I'm looking for, but how do I actually get started? And that's when I started Googling and just trying to figure other routes, because I was taught to cold call attorneys, show up at their offices, send letters, and I just did not resonate with that at all. I just didn't feel like that was going to work. And then I had my son, and during the delivery, there was, I feel like nursing malpractice. And I had femoral nerve damage from pushing for 3.5 hours without getting a break.
Oh,
and yeah, so I couldn't walk for 4.5 months without a walker. I didn't drive for 10 months. I didn't work at the bedside for 10 months. So it was like a real eye opener of, can I really do bedside nursing for the rest of my life? Like, I thought that PRN would just be like easy as a mom, you know, and I just work 2 shifts and it'd be easy. But once I went back at that 10-month mark, it was a little more difficult. And the fact of not seeing my child all day just really put the drive in me to get the legal nursing going. And once I started going, I did some subcontracting. I took some kind of random contracts. I didn't work for an attorney specifically at the beginning. But then I had like an issue where a nurse that I worked for did not pay me. And so it kind of gave me like a bad taste in my mouth. I'm like, should I really continue doing this? Like, can I really make this happen? And I took a break for a little bit, and then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, I was PRN at 2 jobs and got furloughed from both of them, like within 2 weeks of each other. And so after that furlough and having to apply for unemployment as a nurse,
I was going to ask that. Yeah. Wow. We think we're indestructible, but listen to that.
I know. And during a time that they needed nurses, you know, and it was basically like, we can't use you. We'll call you whenever we can use you, because I was working in a pediatric PACU. So they stopped all the elective surgeries and then NICU. So essentially everybody was staying home. So no moms were really like, there wasn't an abundance of moms going into labor, you know, preterm labor. And summer is the busy month for NICU. So that was like right before summer, and it still was not busy at all. So about, I guess it was like 3 weeks or so after I was furloughed from both jobs, my husband was furloughed. So we were both sitting here like, okay, what do we do now? And it was pretty scary. So I can remember like probably a week after he got furloughed, I just sat there and I kept applying for stuff on Indeed. Anything that said legal nurse consultant, legal nursing, remote nursing. It was like contract type work. And I ended up with 4 contracts. And my husband's like, how are you going to do that? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out so I don't have to go back to the hospital, because my commute was gone. I was eating healthier. My kids were thriving. You know, the life was so different than what it was with me working 12 hours at the hospital and not being here for a full day, you know? So I really pushed, and those 4 contracts worked out, and they were kind of staggered the way that they were. And in November of that year, a law office job that I had applied for while I was pregnant with my second actually came back and was like, "Hey, this job is open again. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Yes, I will take it." And so
Wow.
I started that job at the end of 2020 and had that job until January of this year when I started to really build the mentorship. And I really wanted to put my focus there right now. So it's just kind of like a little change there. So it's been a ride, but it's been deep. A lot of trial and error.
Yes, it has. And so I see a lot of subcontracting with LNC when you start off. Is that common? Because it's not with writers at all. But I get a lot of requests from writers to write underneath me. And it's like not something writers do. It's in my contract not to let anyone write underneath me. But
Oh,
I
wow.
yeah, yeah, because I have to be the one to write it. Like it's from like
Mhm.
my brain, because then it's like kind of plagiarism, I'm putting my name on it. So totally different fields, but I wonder if they get that idea from other fields like LNC, where from what I understand, it is more common when you start to have like a subcontract role. Do I have that right?
Yes, it is very common. Nurses can either choose to go the route of just trying to find their own attorney client, or they can subcontract for other nurses or for companies. There's companies that hire subcontractors, and sometimes it's like contract work, and sometimes it's they'll bring you on like for part-time hours. So there's several different options, and I think that sometimes is what people don't understand about legal nursing. It's not just one path. There's several different
Mhm.
paths. But the subcontracting is how I teach my nurses to get started, because there are certain places that you look for those jobs and they're very common, and it doesn't have to necessarily be in your specialty. It can be, and sometimes the attorney wants it to be, but it doesn't have to be in your specialty. And so that is a great way to learn. You have a built-in mentor from the other nurse, and you kind of get your feet wet and make sure that you like it before you jump all the way in.
And are nurses open to having a subcontract? Like, is that beneficial for them too, to have the help? Does it, I guess, take a workload off of them?
I think that it depends on how the nurse is running her business. So
Mm,
all you need is one attorney to make you really, really busy. And if you want to keep that attorney and keep the hours, going and continue to get the work, then some people will subcontract out that work so that they can get it back in a timely fashion. I
got
don't
it.
think that all people go into it thinking, "Oh, I'm going to get so much work that I'm going to need subcontractors." But I think some people try to build it that way too.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. So we've talked so much about LNC, and I fear that we haven't defined it well enough for any of our listeners. So can you talk a little bit more about the role, what the day-to-day really looks like what the responsibilities are for people that have seen the acronym, but they're not really sure what an LNC does?
So, a legal nurse consultant is an RN. So, there's two types of legal nursing. You have your behind the scenes legal nurse consultant, and you have expert witness legal
Mm,
nursing. So the legal nurse consultant behind the scenes, what that person does is they either work for the attorney and develop work product for the attorney, or they work for a nurse who already has, an attorney client. There's an attorney in the equation somewhere, whether you're working for a company or for another nurse. But what you are doing is whenever there is a medical malpractice or a product liability, which is like your mass torts, or personal injury cases, there are medical records involved. And so you are going in the medical records and really using your assessment and critical thinking skills to pick through those records and find the pertinent information to what the patient's complaint is. There's a document actually called the complaint. It's the very first thing that is sent by the plaintiff's attorney. And that generally has a section that tells the story of what they think went wrong, what the patient's story is of what went wrong. And so both sides will request records. And what the LNC does is you look at that complaint, figure out where to start, and you dive through the records to review them and see, is the story true? Is it right? What supports it? Is it a wrong story? Did none of those things happen at all? So you're really using that and just using your assessment skills to go through the medical records to be quicker through them than the attorney would be, because the attorney's not used to looking at, electronic records from the hospital unless they've been doing this a really long time. And then I feel like nurses will find that little needle in the haystack in those records just because they're used to looking at the charting, and it could be something that the attorney doesn't even know is, that it's that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's
They
a
could
great
totally
point
miss
that
it.
we're always used to looking at that screen already. We're already in that mindset. So they might be looking at labs, vitals, nursing notes, that type of thing, and just pulling out the story. Do they have to have a deep background in the legal world too?
No. So
Hmm.
you just need, I mean, technically, if you're looking at it on paper, you don't need a class at all. However, there's more and more people going into the LNC world. And so what I'm seeing is that people who hire them want them to have a basic certificate course. And
Mm.
it doesn't need to be thousands of dollars. You just need something basic that has your basic legal principles in it. Okay. And so you need that to get started. You need a work product to get started, because most people are going to ask you for a sample work product. So typically they want to see you go through some medical records, even if you make up something to develop a chronology and a summary. They want to see your writing skills and
Okay.
if you're actually pulling out pertinent information. So these are things that I supply for my nurses so that they are set up and ready to go when they're ready to apply for jobs.
Love it. So it's kind of like when you're a medical writer and you need your portfolio and it's your best works written in there, they want to understand that you know how to do it because it sounds like a dense job at times. So they want to be able to trust that you know how to actually do it. And it sounds like it might be a little bit of a time crunch sometimes too, maybe.
Yes, it can definitely have a time crunch on it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So, as far as day to day life, it really depends on if you're working from home. So, if you work for a law firm, sometimes that is all in office. Sometimes it's
Hmm.
hybrid, like they'll let you work from home,
Hmm.
but you'll go in 1 to 2 days a week. If
Okay.
you have an LLC and you're working for an attorney, that is all remote. If you're subcontracting for another nurse, that's all remote. So your days are going to look like which path you actually choose. And that's why I like being remote, because it's flexibility of time. Like nobody's telling me I have to work 9 to 5,
Hmm.
and typically they don't. Some law firms are kind of rigid with that. Um, but not all of them. I feel like it's more minor than more because they know this is a remote job. They know it's a flexibility of time job. And you really have to figure out how to be disciplined when you're working from home, because that really is an adjustment. When you come from the hospital or a job that you're clocking in and out of, it's really an adjustment to come home and make yourself work, when nobody is actually supervising that part. So your day to day is going to look however you structure it.
Yeah, I always have this joke. So medical writing, health writing is the same thing. And I always have this joke that like my baseboards have never been cleaner when I have a deliverable due in the next like 2 days. Like I'm scrubbing things that I didn't even know need to be scrubbed, because I am trying to put off that deliverable. So yeah, you
Yeah.
absolutely need to kind of be on yourself when you're a remote worker, owning your own business because most people aren't like checking in to see how you're doing.
Yeah.
They want that like deadline. So yeah, I'm like my own worst enemy with that. I definitely make my deadlines, but it's tough for me sometimes. Yeah, lots of similarities between medical writing and LNC.
Yeah, I didn't even realize. So that's really cool.
I actually did because I don't like to use like network. It's so like formal, but I chat with a lot of LNCs just like on LinkedIn. I'm super curious about like everyone and what they're doing. And they also ask me questions in return. And yeah, a lot of people that are in LNC gravitate towards like medical writing too. They'll ask me like a ton of questions and I look at their title and it turns out they're an LNC too. So same thing with like the flexibility, the remote work. You can work for someone in a company like hybrid or for yourself in an LNC too. So
That's
are
really
there,
cool.
yeah, it is lots of different paths. Are there like
Mhm.
different types of LNC that you can like specialize in or something, or are
Oh,
you
okay.
like a
So
generalist?
I did mention legal
Hmm.
nurse expert witnesses. So
Oh,
you have
yes.
your legal nurse behind the scenes, which is what I was just talking about. And then you have
Hmm.
your legal nurse expert witnesses. So those nurses are typically someone who is still at the bedside in their specialty. So say you're a NICU nurse. You have to still be working in the NICU, not full time, but at least one shift a month. Some of the attorneys want more than that. But what you would do is you're only going to review the part of the case that is your specialty. So you would only review the NICU records and that's it. And with the expert witnesses, they are the ones who actually go to depositions and trials and they're given their expert opinion. So it's very different than behind the scenes. They, as far as pay goes, they typically make double or even sometimes triple what a behind the scenes legal nurse makes because they're given their opinion. So that's kind of the other route you can go with legal nursing too.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like I would be so nervous. So, yeah, it makes sense that those people are paid for. I'm not quite sure I could do that. So you kind of alluded that you don't have to work in your niche to take on a particular job within LNC, which is another crossover from medical writing too. You don't have to write in your bedside niche. You can take writing from different
Oh,
areas. Yeah, another similarity. But are there some bedside specialties that are more sought after when you become an LNC? Or are they kind
um,
of all the same?
not necessarily, but I would say like the really ones that I feel like are sought after are labor and delivery nurses because that is not one thing that a med surge nurse can review. You know what I mean? I work in the NICU, so I can review some of those cases. I will take them to a certain extent because you're dealing with the baby and we go to labor and delivery when the babies are born. So there are aspects of it that I can actually review. But as far as like reading the monitors, the baby monitors, and all of that, that is labor and delivery specialty. And those nurses, I feel like, are really sought after, and they want those particular nurses. They don't want like a med surg nurse or a cardiac nurse reviewing those records because there's no way that even with research, it would be really difficult to review that. But as far as anything else, I feel like it pretty much goes. So my background is PICU, NICU, just all things pediatric and neonatal, different variety of specialties. But I have reviewed adult feet cases. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I've done it. And it can happen. And majority of my cases are adult cases. I've had the pediatric cases, I've had the NICU cases, there have been OB cases, which are the ones that I prefer because that's my specialty and I know that like the back of my hand. But I do take other adult cases just because you can, and that is primarily where the work is the adult
Adult
cases, if that
cases.
makes sense.
No, that does make sense. Yeah. Again, medical writing has certain niches that are more marketable than others. And I actually did write in like the maternity space for a while, and it took me so long to write those deliverables. That's actually one of the only spaces that I say no thank you to because it took me so long. It's just so specialized. The
Mm,
research was so
yeah.
dense. none of it was something that flowed easily through me when I was writing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I could definitely see
Yeah.
those types of nurses being well sought after just because none of it translates. None of it translated for me.
Yeah.
So I could
Yeah.
definitely see that. Do you have to be a nurse for a set amount of years to transition to consulting in that manner?
So I feel like this is like a really highly discussed thing. So I feel like at 2 years of bedside experience, you can start to get started while you're still working at the bedside. I wouldn't recommend like quit your job at 2 years and try to go all in on legal nursing. Continue to get your experience, but you can get started. Some people will say 3 to 5 years for the certification. So there is only one certification, and you don't have to have that certification to work as a legal nurse. But what you do have to have is 5 years clinical experience to be able to sit for that exam. But you also need 2,000 working hours as a legal nurse consultant to also sit for that exam. So that is where a lot of people get the 5 year mark. But there's nothing saying that it has to be 5 years.
No, that's good to know. That's good to know that it's like 2 years you can work for a little bit, but 5 years you're probably really in your prime.
Yeah.
So what's your best advice for nurses listening out there that want to become legal nurse consultants?
So I definitely have to say getting a mentor is super helpful. Just having someone that you can ask questions and run things by. That way you're not just Googling random information and thinking that that's the end all be all, because that's not the case. There are groups for legal nurse consulting, and finding those groups is not something that is blasted on the internet. So those are things like that a mentor would actually be able to answer. That's some of the things that are in my guide. I have a list of several groups to join. Majority of them, probably 90% of them, are free. There are a couple of paid groups that I actually recommend, that my nurses are super successful once they join these groups, because that is where you actually find the jobs and where you network. Networking is so big with legal nursing. So I would suggest, getting a mentor so you can ask questions. You're going to need your basic class, and then you're going to need a work product. So you have to figure out how to get that. I have a report writing class that has an actual sample report attached to the end, and the feedback that I get from that. So what I did is the class is self-paced, but then I meet with you on Zoom and tell you why I corrected what I corrected on your chronology and your summary. And I really feel like that is what the nurses need. They need that one-to-one time to really figure out those small things like that. A lot of people take report writing classes, but it has the sample report, but there's no feedback. And so it's really hard when you don't get feedback from it.
Yeah, a couple of things that I picked up on. I can't agree more with having a mentor. I am just interested in all the different facets of non-traditional nursing. So I have been trying to learn more about LNC, and there's not a lot out there. It's very, very basic. So having someone that can help really open those doors is super, super important. Erin comes highly rated from my network. And also, I can't agree more with networking too. It's
Yeah.
huge. It's huge. It's huge in writing. It opens doors that I didn't even know were there. I keep equating it to like a secret handshake or like a secret knock on a door, and like a path or like a secret door just opens and you had no idea it was there to begin with. Just putting yourself out there and saying hi and introducing yourself is huge. So I definitely agree with networking.
Yeah, you never know when those connections are going to come back to you. Like one of my clients, she had a friend who did legal nurse consulting. She sent him a message and said, "Hey, I got my certificate. I have my work product. I would really love to subcontract for you." She was really disappointed because she said he was like, "Okay, send it over." And she felt like he really wasn't like excited for her. He didn't say, "Oh, I can use you," or anything like that. He just told her to send her information over, Well, what happened was 6 weeks went by, and then he called her and he was like, "Hey, I have this case. Can you do it?" And she was like, "Oh, wait, what?" So there's lots of instances like that. I've had a nurse who literally just talked to an attorney in the parking lot and was able to get some cases from her. One that the family member, so this is a big thing. I always tell people, hey, do you have attorneys in your family or any of your friends, spouses,
Mhm.
attorneys? Do you know anyone who's an attorney that might have a connection to a med mal or personal injury? Like those are ways to connect to. I don't always tell them to do that, but I tell them to try to go that route. Like if you have that, then talk to them, tell them you have questions, or just at least let them know that you're starting as a legal nurse consultant. Because I've had several of them get jobs because they came back and we're like, hey, didn't weren't you saying you were doing LNC work, you know? And so networking is just huge. You just never know when that relationship that you built, you know, even 6 months ago, that somebody's going to come back, and then you might have work for a year from that, you know?
So interesting to tap into your like in real life network too. Like I
Mhm.
always forget that I have like friends in real life that I can
I
ask
know.
about too. I feel like my friends don't
Yeah.
have those type of jobs though. They're mainly engineers. I have a huge pocket of engineers around me. It's wild. So I don't know if they'd be that helpful with that, but that's great advice. All right, Erin Ellsworth, do you have any other parting words for my listeners?
If you're looking into LNC, come talk to me. Just send me a message. Tell me what your questions are. I'm happy to answer general questions. I do it all day, every day. I would love to just talk with you and see if it's actually for you. I mean, any nurse can actually do legal nurse consulting, but some people it's not for. They don't find it interesting, or they find reading records boring. So if you have lots of questions, come and talk to me. I'm happy to answer your questions just through voice messaging on one of my social media networks.
And I'll have all of her social media links right in the show notes. So all of that will be really obvious for you guys to contact Erin. Erin, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I know everyone learned a lot about LNCs from you. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with me
Oh,
today.
yes. Thank you for having me.
All right. Until next time, guys.